Hey guys, today in the shop we're going to be finishing up this DJM lowering kit by getting the front dream beams in and hopefully getting rid of some of this fender gap. Stay tuned. So I didn't intend on working on this truck today, but I was going to work on the DT466 truck. The reason I didn't is the DT466 truck is out there. It's pretty nasty out. And this truck was already inside. So I figured might as well finish up the front suspension on this thing now while it's in here. No sense in pushing it out, pushing it back in, pushing it out, pushing it back in. So I'm going to get the DJM front dream beams in on this and then get it back on its wheels. I'm going to reuse the original brakes just for now. Definitely going to be changing the brakes before I do anything crazy with this, but it's going to be a little bit down the road before we do any kind of brake upgrade. So I'm going to put the original stuff back on and get the truck rolling again, and then I think I ended up getting a second drive shaft that I think what I'm going to do is just cut it for now, just so I can drive the truck. I'm going to do it myself. I know it's not the right way, and it's not going to be anything that I really use for any street use. It's just going to be more so I can yard drive it for now. I'm just going to cut the length out of it that I need, weld it back together, try to get it as true as I can. Like I said, not something I would recommend doing on any kind of street vehicle. I don't plan on driving on the street like that. I just want to be able to move the truck around and kind of, waiting on the drive shaft shop on this. So once that's in, we can drive the truck around. But first things first, let's get this thing up on jack stands and get the wheels off. Replacing these I-beams kind of may seem like a little bit of a daunting task, but to be honest with you, it's really not that bad. If you have any kind of experience working on suspension and steering and everything, it should be a decent weekend job, maybe even be able to do the front in one day. But this truck's going to be a little more involved because I live in New England, and as we talked about before with the back, everything in the front is rotted. The main frame itself is in good shape, but things like coil bucket just rotten to pieces. So I'm going to be going a few extra steps. I'm replacing the coil buckets on both sides and the actual radius arms and the radius arm brackets. I got them off a nice clean truck, so what we're going to do is take everything else apart, cut the rivets off of these brackets, bust the brackets off, and then bolt the new ones on. So first thing I like to do when I'm doing any kind of suspension work like this is disconnect the tie rods. That way the knuckles can spin nice and free. It allows you to get to the back of the caliper bolts a little bit easier, and you're not trying to turn the wheel back and forth to get tools in there. And it just kind of gets that first step done. So I'm going to take the tie rod ends off. Then I'll start taking the brakes off. You definitely want to get calipers, brackets, rotors, all that stuff off of here, and then we can start working on the actual suspension part. One quick thing I forgot to mention is when you go to drop the steering down on these two-wheel drive trucks, the sway bar is in the way. So you just have to disconnect the sway bar from both ends, and then you can swivel it down and then the tie rods can drop the whole rest of the way out. And then after you do that, get the tie rods down, like I said, get the brakes off, the rotors. Then what you can start doing is stripping this stuff off. So I'm not reusing the knuckles or any of that. I have nice clean stuff. As you can see, all this stuff here is just so crusty and rotted. It's just not worth saving. So I ended up finding a whole bunch of clean stuff to use. But if you were going to be reusing it, which normally you should, hopefully your truck's not as rotted as this thing, you can go ahead and take the cross bolt out that holds the upper ball joint in, and then take the lower ball joint nut off, and then you can separate that, get the knuckle right off of the truck, get it out of your way. I'm going to leave it on. I'm going to save myself a little bit of labor. And the next step we're going to do is get a floor jack under the whole I-beam, just get the tension off of the shock a little bit, and then disconnect the shock. Don't worry too much about saving the shock. These can be a little tricky up top. The nuts are usually rotted. Usually can't get them off, or you tighten them down and they won't back off. So the kit does come with new shocks. So you can just go ahead and get the shock right out of the way. And then there's one bolt that holds the coil spring with this little bracket on. It's a 10 millimeter. So you can disconnect that bolt and then lower the floor jack down, and the whole I-beam and radius arm will lower right down. And then we can worry about starting to get the spring off and going from there. Once you get the spring dropped down and the whole arm swinging out of your way, you got to start taking apart the spring, the perch for the spring, which also doubles as the sway bar bracket, and that nut. See, I got an extension right here with a socket on it, straight down the middle of the spring. That nut also is on top of the bolt that holds the radius arm onto the I-beam. So you got to get the spring off, the bracket off, and once that stuff's off, there's another nut that holds that all together. So these can be a little bit of a pain. Sometimes you need to warm the nut up with some torches, and definitely if you have the time ahead of time, put some penetrating oil on there to get it nice and freed up. But it's hard to get an impact gun in here. You're probably going to need to use a ratchet, and just take your time, be careful. This truck, like I said, is extraordinarily rusty, so this is going to fight me the whole way. Yours, most likely not that bad. If it is, I'm praying for you. So let's get this thing apart, and then we can start pulling the I-beams out. Man, I honestly think the Titanic sitting at the bottom of the ocean has less rust on it than this truck. I mean, just get a load of that shock tower there. So this is the bolt I was talking about, and the sway bar perch sits on top of that, then the spring, then there's a little washer you'll see, then the nut. So that nut we took off came off right there. The next step for you, if you're replacing just installing the lowering kit, would be to take this nut off right here, and that bolt goes all the way through. So as you can see, mine has become one with the I-beam right inside there. And that's not even worth trying to take out for me. If you were taking it out and you do have some rust issues, what you can do is try to clean up as much of the rust as you can so it doesn't get stuck, and then you take the nut off, and then what you can do is you start to use a ratchet or an impact gun on the bottom and spin it and it'll start to free up the rust. If you still can't get it to free up, normally you're not supposed to put any heat to these I-beams, but this I-beam is going in the scrap bin anyway, so what you can do is where the bolt goes through, you'll see it's inside the I-beam here, then it's exposed, then it's back in the I-beam again, is you can start to just heat up the I-beam itself and then impact on the bottom of that. If you still can't get it off, you can get replacement bolts from Ford. So what I would suggest at that point is get a new bolt, grind or torch this off right here, grind or torch it off on the bottom, just being careful not to mess up the radius arm at all, and then you can take it all apart. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take off the radius arm and the I-beam in one piece. So my next step is going to be to take off the bolt at the back of the radius arm. I'll show you that right over here. And then the bolt right down there, it is very close to the oil pan on a 6-liter truck. So there's one on each side. We're going to get those off and then go from there. All right, so minor little issue here. This bolt right here is the one that holds this whole arm to the frame. Now, I don't know if you can really see this, but there is not a lot of room between this bolt and the oil pan. So I loosen that bolt up and try to take it out, but it will not come out. It hits the oil pan. So what I got to do is take off this nut, that nut, and that nut up there, and take the whole bracket off with the arm. I'm not sure if you have to do this on the gasoline trucks. I mean, this truck is a 6-liter, so for sure, if you got a 6-liter truck, that's the way you got to do it. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I did just put a wrench on them, and they loosened right up a little bit, so I'm going to keep taking them off. Drop that bracket down, and then we will swap it out. All right, well, we got the passenger side all out of the way and performed some pretty serious weight reduction there. So next up, I'm going to work on these coil buckets. I want to get the passenger side all done and then move on to the driver's side. So if you do have to do these, mine was already broken off here where the brake line goes. I'm leaving that just like that for right now because I don't want to open up the brake system, have to bleed the brakes tonight. I just want to get this stuff done, so I'm just pushing the side. But what you would normally do is you would disconnect the brake line from the back of that. Then there's a little clip that pops onto the back of the rubber brake hose here, and you pop that clip off and the line pops out. Once you get the line out, then there's 4 rivets. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the front, and then there's 2 rivets on the bottom, and then a bolt underneath right in the middle. So you can do these a couple of different ways. You can take a grinder, you can grind the rivets off. To me, that's time consuming. I use a torch. I just torch them all off. If you haven't had too much experience with torching rusty stuff, try to get as much of the scale off as possible because it's going to make you really have a hard time torching this. But I'm going to set the camera up over here on the tripod. I'll grab the torches. I'm going to scale this a little first and then cut those, and then we'll pry the buckets off. Next up, once you get the old bucket off, is I like to clean it all up and then just kind of hit the frame with at least some primer. That way you're not getting rust built up again behind the new bucket you put on. I was fortunate enough to find these good used buckets. They're in really nice shape, so I'm going to get these on. You definitely want to use grade 8 hardware or better putting these buckets back on. You don't want to use some cheap, chintzy hardware because if you do, I mean, you got to remember, these buckets are what's holding your entire weight of your truck up. The springs riding here, the shocks riding here. Just don't use cheap hardware. It was only like $15 for all grade 8 bolts for both sides. So let's get these things bolted on, and then once I do, I'm going to just hit this all with some undercoating. Then we can start putting the rest of the suspension back in. All right, now that that's all set, we can start putting the suspension in. So if you don't know much about these DJM Dream Beams, these are a real advantage over traditional ways of lowering the truck. So a lot of people on these trucks will get a lowering spring. Now the issue with that is on a twin I-beam truck, as you lower the truck with a shorter spring, now the whole I-beam starts to go up. And as it starts to go up, it starts to change the steering geometry, starts to change all of your angles, camber, and all that, and it really makes it difficult to get the truck dialed back in again. Where with these Dream Beams, what they are is they're just fabricated to raise the whole knuckle up. So you retain your stock spring, the truck rides nice, and you can even retain stock style shocks. You don't have to get really aftermarket shocks. This one does come with them, and they are a nice quality shock, but if you do need to replace them, you can just get factory shocks, and they bolt right into place because your radius arm is still in the factory location. So what we're going to do is on the passenger side, we're going to bolt the bracket back onto this end. I'm going to leave the center bolt loose, but we're going to put that bracket on, and then I'm going to get this Dream Beam back mounted up to the frame, and then we can start attaching the radius arm onto the I-beam, and then we can start putting our springs on. So after messing with this a bit, what I found is it's actually easier to take the radius arm completely out of the truck, unbolt it from that rear bracket. And the reason why is because you're going to have a real hard time getting the bolt in the backside under the oil pan, and also getting this big bolt in that goes right through the radius arm and through the I-beam. So if you take this bracket out, then you get the radius arm onto the I-beam, send this bolt through, get the nut started. I wouldn't go crazy tightening it down because you still want this to be able to move around. Then we can jack it up, get the back bolt in on the radius arm. Then you can start tightening everything down, getting everything in place, and getting the shock and the spring on. I really think that you're going to have a hard time getting this big bolt in if you still have the radius arm on and you're trying to get the I-beam on at the same time. So let's do that. I got this radius arm out because I was swapping mine out anyway, and I'm going to get this bolt through. Then we're going to get the back bolt on the radius arm, start putting the spring and the shock on. Now you can put on the spring perch and sway bar bracket. Put the spring on with the retainer and bolt the spring down. All right, next up, get a floor jack underneath the I-beam, and then you can just push the spring into place and jack up on the I-beam. Once you get it up into place, get it just so it starts to seat, and then you can get the bracket back in. Then go ahead and put the new shock absorber in. So now you can install your original alignment bushing in the Dream Beam. Install the knuckle, brakes, then you can hook up your steering, and finally the sway bar end links. And then finally, once you've checked over all your work, reinstall the wheels and take it off the jack stands. Well guys, that's it for tonight. I'm really pleased with the way this truck came out. I think it's sitting nice. It's going to look a lot better once we get a nice set of wheels on here. Obviously these rusty steel wheels are kind of just temporary. And as far as the brakes go, I got some big things coming. I think you guys are going to be really, you're going to really like what I'm going to do with the brakes on this truck. But let me know what else you guys think. I got to do some body work on here. And I'd be curious to see if you want to see videos of that. We got cab corners, rocker panels, and some wheel arch patches on the bed. So if you want to see that, let me know. If not, I'm just going to get all the body work banged out off camera. To be honest with you, I'm not looking forward to that part. It's not really my forte, but either way, we're going to get it done. And I think that's it for now, guys. So if you like this video, hit the like button. As always, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And thanks for watching In the Shop.